Masatlamahle Kusile, it's a very good morning. Thank you for tuning in. This is Kusile Breakfast Show, the Tuesday edition. We are on the 25th day of February 2025. It's been a while, Mguni. Very good morning. Welcome back.
Thank you, Lulu. Thank you for welcoming back.
Hope you're fully rested.
I feel refreshed and I'm ready to, hop onto the conversations that matter in shaping the development of the Kingdom of Eswatini. So very good morning to you as well. Very good morning to our viewers at home. And as I'm back, some of the concerning stories that I saw yesterday reading the newspaper did indeed worry a lot of Eswatini across the nation. Of course, we woke up to a harrowing story yesterday. A young mother, barely 20 years old, accused of killing her newborn baby. It's the kind of tragedy that forces us to confront uncomfortable realities beyond the shock as well as the headlines. It lays bare an issue that continues to tighten its grip on Eswatini, the teenage and unwanted pregnancies. Nzaba lenkulu lena lesayiteke kakhulu sola kwana nathi nje sisakhula, but it's more than just a personal crisis. It's a national concern with far-reaching consequences. While adolescent birth rates are climbing, learners are dropping out in worrying numbers and without intervention. Now, this could become one of the barriers, or rather the biggest barriers to achieving inclusive as well as quality education by the year 2030. But what do the numbers really tell us? How does teenage pregnancy shape the country's economy? And are we, as a society, giving young people the support that they need, both girls and boys, to make informed decisions about their futures? This morning, we'll sit down with Zandile Masangane from the Ministry of Health. She's going to give us a clearer picture as we break down the statistics, the policies that are at hand, as well as the realities on the ground. What does the law dictate on adolescent family planning? Are there tangible programs to keep teenage parents in school? And crucially, are we doing enough to prevent young people from slipping through the cracks? That is the conversation this morning, 7:30 a.m. Do stay on the program with us for the duration of the show.
Yeah, kanti ke at 6:30 today sitawuphinze sikhulumisane nomxhumanisi wamaphoyisa nesive the Royal Eswatini Police Service last night bakhokhe an urgent notice bexwayisa sive samaswati kakhulukati motorists kokuthi asabamise kancane emahambo abo luhambo labo loluya eMozambique ngokuthi there's a hostile situation khona lapho 10 kilometers from Mhlumeni border. Sitava kabanti ukuthi ingabe kwendekani ingabe bangatiphephisa kanjani amaswati kakhulukati labo lasebafuna ukubuya ngekhathi Eswatini. Phiko phindile vela kati sabe sinaye ecingweni asichazela kabantu ukuthi kwendekani kahle kahle amaswati aphephile yini vele. Do stay with us. Kongmanje sibuke na lethamba imbili kuma phephandzaba. As going to speak Eswatini Observer, your leading headlines this Tuesday. TLC's 20 million emalangeni in supplementary budget. Senator wants report on previous 30 million emalangeni. Asks why TLC is in the supplementary budget yet it's a private entity. And in other news, Minister Owen says, give me 3 weeks to engage TSC. This follows that the minister was visited by SNAT members yesterday at the Ministry of Education. In other news, magistrate wants 20,000 emalangeni for DD. And another suspect, poacher, has been shot dead at Hlane.
Sibukate midlalo Eswatini Observer indzaba lehamba embili emaqembu ke lalishumi nesithupha ataqhubeka aqhutselane ku PLE. I-PLE ke sevite umhlangano lophuthumako. There's an agenda let's say it doesn't really reflect any subject that touches on Wanderers or the recent judgment. And the meeting is to be held tomorrow at Esquarta House. EFA promises to address Wanderers issue. On another story, Fortune Ngwenya is Privic's best. That is the golf tournament courtesy of Privic, where Fortune Ngwenya was named the champion for this year's 2025 edition. On another story, supporter caught unlawfully selling tickets. This is despite the Premier League of Eswatini clearly indicating the outlets where football fanatics would purchase tickets to gain them entry into the stadium. A supporter was caught selling tickets at Mavuso Sports Center. Pix Spa pumps in 50,000 emalangeni to Hoho Football, and NTT Toyota dresses Sitsebe Samhlekazi.
Moving on to the Eswatini Daily News, Eswatini's public debt has grown to 36.16 billion emalangeni as of December 31st, 2024, reflecting an increase of 1.45 billion from the previous year, according to the 2024-2025 performance report. You can read more on page 2. In other news, government calls for stringent austerity measures at EEC, and Selo Makega graces Buhleni Bukanu ceremony.
EFA runs to FIFA over Supreme Court ruling is the biggest story there on the Eswatini Daily News sports headlines. It's another boardroom battle that looms large after Eswatini Football Association submitted the Supreme Court ruling in the Manzini Wanderers 10-month relegation saga. On another one, Lwabe junior level, Sikali 6 sharper. And Riviero insists Pirates still in race for a league title.
All right, and that's it for our newspaper headlines. It's 6 minutes after 6. We go for an ad break. Nasibuya sathatha Ndzabate Eswatini.
Kude lesinye isikhathi ngaphandle kwalesi.
Aba research bafunze.
Being risky means ukuthi nalokuwa kwayo kumula.
Nathi kufuna sente ukukhiqiza lokusembilini.
Sotla mahle sibonge ukuthi soronhleli nathi ehlelweni Kusile breakfast show uhlelo lwangalesibili kulesikhathi sanyalo sidabona Indzaba desiswati. Umkhosi webuganu wephethe kahle waphinze waba impumelelo esigodlweni eBuhleni. Lo mkhosi wephethe ngekuthi bophezulu komkhono bavalelise ngengoma ke embi kwesilo semhlaba nendlovukazi Mhlekazi ngelisonto Ntsambama esigodlweni eBuhleni.
Sigaba sekuqala semkhosi wobugano weminyaka wa-2025 sesifike emaphethelweni kulandela ukuthi ugoqodwe esigodlweni eBuhleni ngemuva kokuthi lo mkhosi uthathe emalanga lamathathu. Ibutho belingenele lo mkhosi esifundeni sakaHhohho lishaya etandla emakhosini lacela indlela. Lilanga lekugcina lalo mkhosi licale ngokufika kwemakhosi emabeleni esigodlweni lapho bekukade kugidzelwa khona. Lo mkhosi lona uhlanganisa sive semaswati sibumbane ngamasiko nangendlela yaso yekuphila. Kanti uphinze lo mkhosi ukhona kuhlanganisa emaswati naletinye tive njengoba bowukade ungenelwe nanguletinye tive nemaswati lapha even labomakhelwane. Ekubeni libutho lishingilide libe seligidza ummiso lovule indvuna yelibutho lakaHhohho. Amakhosi abe sagidza njiloni nalo libutho emva kokuthi isigaba semiso sifike emaphethelweni. Libe seliyathamba libutho kusho kona kuvala lo mkhosi kuleli langa. Kuthamba-ke kuvulwe indvuna. Sigodlo naso singenile enkhundleni njengoba bayesikhuluna yangenile kwentala etibukwako. Abalondolozi labancane nabo abakasaleli ngephandle bangenile enkundleni bathamba. Naluthango lolunye lolufaka ekhathi imibutho yomithathu yetekuvikela netekuphepha eveni namatiko ahulumende nemimango lendlela etibukwako kulolu hlangothi. Umkhosi sewuyawuchubekela esigodlweni edlane ngempelasonto letawubusiswa ngemakhosi. Etintsapeni kubika Pholile Maziya anasambulo masuku esigodlweni ebuhleni.
Indvuna yelitiko letemfundvo umhlonishwa owenxumalo ethi uhulumende utawusukumisa luhlelo lwekulungisa takhiwo tetikolwa letingekho esimeni lesikahle. Indvuna yethi lolu hlelo luyingxenye yokuqinisekisa ukuthi lizinga letemfundvo liyachubeka liyathutfuka libamba emazinga emhlaba emfundvo lekhonsako.
Indvuna yetiko letemfundo umhlonishwa owenxumalo ngesikhathi indlu yabaye esikhulu idzingidze emaphakela eminyakathi imali wahulumende wa-2025-2026 yethulile iphalamende ukuthi litiko liyaconza kahle ukuthi liningi letikolwa eveni linemagumbi ekufundzela langekho esimeni lesikahle. Kungako uhulumende utawusukumela etula abuke lihlelo lokulungisa tikolwa lokuyingxenye yekutfutfukisa lizinga letemfundo eveni.
Indzaba yama-maintenance ngithi hambile tikolwa tiphelile honorable speaker. Ngisabuka lokuthi baqale ngeke zabambisana i-maintenance. Lokuya nje finance asesiboneni lokuthi nabe kwenteka sehlelakala siyithatha le mali. Uphephukile sasangana siphuma sibhekaphi. Kude iplan esinayo budget. So siyacela ke finance lokuthi going forward asesibone ukuthi nabe kuyaphephuka njengoba nje ngalo kuphephukile siyabonga ukuthi micro projects yabanikeza le material. Ngihambile ngakocoma intaba ngayakuphi kuphi etikolweni tikolwa tifile honorable speaker. So nyalo vele icabinet siyabukusana lokuthi iphuma nayiphi iplan. Noma phela thina sikhule thina batali bebasibambisa tikolwa betingekho lesimo lesikuso. Sisabuka ke ama options ukuthi lento leyo ke honorable speaker si correcta kanjani.
Iphalamende icelile nasendvuneni ukuthi isebente indzaba abothishela labasebenta iminyaka basebenta ngetivumelwano tesikhashane temporal labanye baze basebenta iminyaka lengetulu kweli-15. Nendzaba ke yabothishela nhloko labacosha abafundzi etikolweni babacoshela indzaba yemali yekufundza ikakhulukati bantfwana bendlunkulu. Etindzabeni Eswatini TV kubika Samkelisiwe Khoza eMbabane.
Tikolwa letisemaphandleni titawunikelelwa ngabongcondvomshina labangu-1000. Indvuna yelitiko letemfundvo umhlonishwa owenxumalo ethi loku kutawendeka kusetjentiswa lokukhona emkhatsini walelitiko inhlangano legcugcutela ukuthi kufundwe i-Eswatini Literacy Project kanye nalabatawunikela ngalabongcondvomshina i-Computers for Africa levela eveni lase-Scotland.
Lolu hlelo leli noma lisengakasunyiswa ngokusemthethweni kodwa selivele licalile esikoleni ngomhlaba iyaduma esifundeni sakaManzini. Lesikole lesi sanikelwa ngabongcondomshini labangu-30. Indvuna lelitiko letemfundo umhlonisha Owen Nxumalo uchaza kabanti ngalolu hlelo lokunikela latikolo ngabongcondomshina.
Lama computers akatawushiyana. Kukhona lama computers esitafundisa ngabo bantwana bo grade 1, grade 2, bese kuthi lamasha bese ke angena ku higher primary education bese ke lamanye ke angena nase secondary. Kepha la ifocus yethu itaba kuletikolwa lesemakhaya. Nabe lobudlalo bethu buchubeka bube kahle. Batawusipha letincwadi letenza abo 50,000 leti tawusetshenziswa e-primary nase high school. Sibhekise ubudlalo bethu buchubeke bekulo buhle because inyalo sifuna vele kube nalama gadgets latawenda ukuthi tonke letincwadi ditholakala kulama gadgets. Lokho ke vele kutawukhulisa ebuchwephesha etikolweni.
We are going to bring more and more computers so that at least each child can have that. And we'll also be bringing books, reading books. These books are not curriculum-based books. These are just books to help cultivate the culture of reading so that the kids can improve.
Umqondisi we-Eswatini Literacy Project Ezekiel Malenya nguye lokhulumela enkampani ye-Computers for Africa. Malenya uthi basaqala nje kwamanje ngalolu hlelo kodwa litawufinyelela etifundeni totini etela kuleli bekusengeke ukuthi lokungenani. Bafisa ukusebenzisana nesikole sinye ngesifundza sinye ukuthi batawuphinze futhi banikele ngetincwadi tekufundza letingasito tesikole letingu-50,000 letosita kukhuthaza abafundzi ukuthi batsandze kufundza. Umkhombandlela wetemfundo kuleli weminyaka wa-2022 kuye eminyakeni wa-2034 uhlose ekuqinisa tebuchwephesha kutetemfundo. Ephansi kwalolu hlelo lakuleli lihlose ekuqinisekisa ukuthi bafundzi labangu-60,000 bayafika elisitweni lesimanjemanje lwetemfundo. Etindzabeni kubika Fortune Dlangamandla ngisembabane.
Timphunga setikhute libayethe kuyo ingwenyama ngekubusisa liholide lemkhosi webuganu. Timphunga tithi leli holide liyindlela yemakhosi lakhombisa ngayo lutsandvo lanalo kubomake. Kanti-ke futhi lihambisana ngco netimiso takamhlaba tekuhlonipha bomake ngetigaba letahlukene.
Tidze nathi chubeka nemsebenzi welusuku timphunga ngemsombuluko. Imphunga umfanenkosi ngangabani ushukumisile endlini lehloniphekile ukuthi timphunga tikhute libayethe tibonge emakhosini elive ngekubusisa liholide lemkhosi webuganu.
Sibonga ngavilinye sonke ukuthi wekunene wenda indvo lenhle kakhulu futhi nje lejabulisako ngoba cishe bomake bekungaba bantu lababonana ngasibasalele emuva ke nje ke yona ekunene ikhombile indlela. Futhi ke sikuvumisa usathi ukuthi singakano singaka nje Madam President siphile ngoba bekunabomake.
It was just an expression of appreciation. Ukuthi sibonga okandaba kusendela umsebenzi lomhlena kangaka. Sibonga okandaba for honoring women. Mhlambe kungaba kunibongela nani bobabe nonke la ngithi mayeni bahle. Akushaywa tandla endlini koja mayeni bahle. Nisuke etandleni tethu nonke nisuke etandleni tethu.
Ingwenyama ngekuthi i-declare leli holiday solo iya-emphasize kulama protocols livela lisayinile ekuthuthukisa ne-empowerment yabomake nje nehlala kahle yabo.
Kusinika lithuba kusithi once and for all the record has to be set straight. Nasikhuluma ngemaganu festivals asikhulumi nje ngendzaba ukuthi ngilapho siyojabula khona kumbe ngaleto nazo talesihlahla akwati umhlaba ukuthi lapha siya kwi-event where we are celebrating our customary and traditional identity.
Timphunga tithe emakhosi ngebuholi baso silo semhlaba ngaleli holide agcizelela kona ukuthi ibophelela kwelive laseSwatini ekuhlonipheni amalungelo abomake njengokuthi ibophelela kwalo live laseSwatini kuto timiso takamhlaba. Etindzabeni yeSwatini TV kubika Samkelisiwe Khoza nginasikhumbuzo Dlamini naTemba Shabangu eParliament.
Inhlangano yabothishela kuleli Eswatini National Association of Teachers leyatiwa ngeSNAT imikisela uhlalo etiKhalotalo etiko letemfundvo lapho khona ikhonkosela ukuthi akabuyiselwe emsebentini mengameli wayo uMbongwa Dlamini. Inhlangano yeSNAT ithi kute-ke sizatfu lesenta ukuthi libandla lelicasha abothishela i-Teachers Service Commission TSC lengephansi kwaleli tiko letemfundvo lingakhiphi incwadzi legunyata ukuthi lo mengameli wayo abuyele esikolweni ayekuyawusebenta.
Indzaba yokubuyelela kwalo mengameli wenhlangano yabothishela esikolweni seyitekwe inkantolo litfaya ekhasi leyo yethi 70 Industrial Court kanye nenkantolo lenkulu i-High Court. Cishe tonke tijubo taleti inkantolo betitsi akabuyele esikolweni lomengameli waSNAT Mbongwa Dlamini atfula leluhla lwetikhalo mabhalana walenhlangano lothi vilakati utsi akabuyiselwe esikolweni mengameli. Utsi lenhlangano seyitame emahlandla kodwa ingaphumeleli ukuthi kubanjwe imihlangano nelibandla lelicisha abothishela ukuthi isebento lendzaba yekubuyiselwa kwaDlamini esikolweni. Utsi akulandzelwe tijubo tetinkantolo kulendzaba utsi bafuna uhulumende achubeke nekuholela Dlamini.
Leso lesichaza lesikuzi ke lana ke everyday sichaza ke ukuthi manje le judgment yababe zonke makagula ide stay yakwa grata khona eTSC ukuthi manje ayime ingambhadali kusakhona lokunye okutawendiwa. Sakuthi siyachaza ke kude stay kulendzaba kude stay kulendzaba nisebenzisane nekuhlanipha kwenu nemandla enu. We are also going to use our own power. We know our power as a trade unionist. We know our power is to Kenya.
Loluhla letikhalo lomukelo elisekela amabhalane lomkhulu etiko letemfundvo lelibuka inqubo etikolweni lungelo nhlengethwa.
Minister ukhona siyabonga le petition sayibukela sitangena naye executive ya SNAT siyobona minister ngekhathi lapho batafika bakhulume khona kabanzi ngale bakubhalela phasi.
Ngesikhathi kuhlanganiswa lombiko lenhlangano yaSNAT kanye nendvuna yelitiko letemfundvo umhlonisha owenqumala nalaba setigabeni elisetulu kuleli tiko bebekatse bahlangene badzingisa kabanti leluhla lwetikhalo lulethwe kulamalunga lasebuholweni emagatsheni lang-15 alenhlangano yaSNAT. Kuvakele kutsi nasekuphelele umhlangano indvuna yetemfundo umhlonishwa Nxumalo ibe siyakhulumisana nalabo bebakatse letikhalo kodwa ngesikhathi kuhlanganiswa lombiko lo bekusangakavakali kutsi ibeke yatsini. Etindzabeni kubika Fortune Dlangamandla ngisembabane.
Bosomabhizinisi labangamashumi bakuleli sebaceceshwe kabanti ngekusebenzisa luhlelo lolubaxhumanisa netimakethe temhlaba lolungephansi kwe-International Trade Center. Bongani Simelane lobuketa inhlelo kule nkampani uchaze kabanti ukuthi lolu hlelo litawubasita kanjani bosomabhizinisi.
Sibe sifundisa bosomabhizinisi labancane ngalawa mathulusi aka-ITC nakulesithi trade map and also market access map. Lokhu khona kukusita ungusomabhizinisi uma uneliphupho lokufinyelela etimakethe temhlaba ukuthi kahle kahle letimakethe tekuphi in terms of export potential, athini vele lama requirements ekufinyelela kuleyo makethe leyo, and athini kahle kahle letinzengo or the prices of lama products lawo. Kuze ngawukhona lokuthi ngihlele ekhaya ngicabanga ngineliphupho lekufinyelela etimakethe temhlaba ngiphi vele letimakethe temhlaba uyabona kumele ngifinyelele kito.
Thabani Masuku lobuya eRoyal Science and Technology Park uthi lokhu kutawubasita bosomabhizinisi labangaphansi kwasongcondvo.
Bosomabhizinisi laba sekwa i-RSTP Business Incubator batawusitakala ngekuthi bakhone kutfola timakethe letingaphesheya letingekho kuleli live laseSwatini kuthi kukhule lamabhizinisi abo mhlambe batfole nema-customer langasheshe awa-understand aconze ukuthi lama innovations nalabo songcondvo the technologies that they come up with kuthi tingasita kanjani, and maybe ukhanze ukuthi le product noma le solution ayikalungeli imakethe yala kangwane kepha ingaperforma kangcono kule tinye timakethe letingekho la vele.
Bosomabhizinisi bathi banenshisekelo lenkhulu yekumikisa umkhicito wabo kulamanye amave.
Namhla sitofundza market analysis tools la ngona atosita ukuthi ukhone lokwati ukuthi so i-demand yale product yakho iseveni liphi and ime kanjani.
So kule training lena sifundiswa lokuthi engabe yini lele singayenda ngutiphi letindlela lesingatisebentisa kude sati ukuthi lama products lesiwenda lapha ekhaya eSwatini siwamikisa kuphi emaveni ngesheya kwetilwane nekuthi kude sithole i-information lesita ukuthi yini lekufuneka siyakhe ngasiphi isikhathi uyabona singakwenda kanjani konke lokho.
I-International Trade Center yenda tinhlelo letahlukene kwelekelela bosomabhizinisi bakuleli ukuthi bakhone ukukhulisa umkhicito wabo loya ngaphandle kwelive lokufaka ekhathi ukuthi bazuze ngalokuphelele ngaphansi kwesivumelwano i-SADC European Union Economic Partnership Agreement. Etindzabeni teSwatini TV kubika Nelsiwe Ndlangamandla nginavuma inkosi Nzinisa Embabane.
Indvodza lelahlwe licala lekubulala makekati wayo lebe yimsolela ukuthi uyayitsakatha lobe kwenta ukuthi ke impilo yale ndvodza ingachubeki igwetshwe iminyaka lengama-25 ibhadla ejele. Ngakulokunye lenye indvodza leboshelwe lokucala nale ndvodzana yona igwetshwe iminyaka lengama-20 ibhadla ejele. Le ndvodzana ligama layo nguMajahezitha Dlamini kanti lomunye logwetshwe iminyaka lengama-20 nguLucky Albert Mabila.
Ufakazi lobetfule enkantolo ukuthi umsolwa wesibili Majahezitha Dlamini kanye nemndeni wakhe bebasola umufi longumakekati wakhe ngekubathakatha. Umndeni wabomsolwa wahlanganisa imali lapho bacasha khona inyanga ukuthi ibulaye lesikhwama semufi lebekusolakala ukuthi sebuthakathi. Ufakazi lobetfule enkantolo bukhomba ukuthi nembala lesikhwama sabulawa. Lo msolwa lo wafakaza enkantolo ukuthi wase ucela lisithu lemngani wakhe empendulo Mhlanga losacela iganga ukuthi amtholele likhukhuva lwenyanga lelitomgeza njengeseluleko lanikwa sona umsolwa kulenyanga leyabulawa lesikhwama lebekusolakala ukuthi semufi sebuthakathi. Inhloso yenkulu yalokhu ukuthi umsolwa atawubona incubekela embili empilweni yakhe. Akulokunye umsolwa wekucala lakhe Albert Mabila wacelwa yena ngumhlanga ukuthi abachubele imotolo. Mabila bekakhona ngesikhathi kulahla umtimba wemufi kanti kude lokungale kwalokho lakwenta. Wacala kudibana nalomsolwa wesibili ngalelo langa lekulahla kwemtimba wemufi. Mhlanga ngule ndvodza lesolakala ukuthi yacashwa ngumsolwa wesibili ukuthi babulaye logogo ngeminyaka wa-2021 ngesikhathi umufi aya kuyokhonta esontweni. Umufi bekakade eneminyaka lengu-61 ibudala. Ijaji lenkantolo lenkulu Bonkosi Magagula selinika tizatfu futhi lesigwebo lithi umsolwa wesibili nguye lowahlela kwentiwa kwalobucala. Ijaji lithi lomsolwa lo wesibili wafuna lisitho kumpendulo Mhlanga ukuthi ento lobucala bekubulala. Ijaji lithi lokukholelwa kwemsolwa wesibili ebuthakathini akunika izatfu lesinetisako sekuthi isigwebo singaba ngileso lesingasinzi. Ijaji lithi umsolwa wekucala kusuye ngcondongcondo kuleli cala kodwa wasita ekulahleni isidvumbu semufi nje kuphela. Aloko lijaji lithi umsolwa lo wadlala inzima lenkulu ekufihleni ibucala ngenxa yokuthi bekade ifunela imali nje kuphela. Lijaji lithi lokubulawa bekuhleliwe kunesibhoku kanti baphindze bentiwa futhi kwanganakwa nje impilo yemuntu. Lijaji lithi bomsolwa abakake batshengise ukuthi isola lokungenta ukuthi bashaye ngeliswathi loluncane. Lijaji Magagula lithi kufanele-ke ukuthi batfole isigwebo lesinesindvo lesihambelana lelicala kude sitosabisana labanye. Kudodo timbili letigwebo lijaji Magagula lithi isikhathi bomsolwa labasihlete ejele sitobalwa. Licinzelele lase lithi akucace nje emaswatini ukuthi tinkantolo angeke tamukele tiphindze tibeketelele kuthathwa kwempilo ikakhulukati uma lokho kuhambisana netinsolo letingaphatheki lokufaka ekhatsi ibuthakathi. Etindzabeni kubika Fortune Ndlangamandla ngisenkantolo lenkulu.
Kutemidlalo inkampani yaka-NTT Kutemidlalo inkampani yaka-NTT Eswatini inikelele likhetselo lesive labomake ngetembatfo temali letilinganiselwa ku-40,000 emalangeni. Lelikhetselo litawucala kugcoka letembatfo lokuliya kuyawudlala nelikhetselo lesive laseNamibia.
Emitameni yekusekela kanye nekutfutfukisa ibhola yabomake kuleli titolo taka-NTT Eswatini tinikelele ngetembatfo phecelete ama-tracksuit elikhetselo lesive labomake sitsebe samhlekazi. Lawrence Methula ithula letembatfo uchazile ukuthi bafisile kuchubeka nekusekela yona ibhola lapha eveni.
Savela ehlangothini labo Rafaela nakhona safaka sandla lesibonakalako. Siyethemba ukuthi mhlambe naku kuhle emabhodweni iphekwa nganye langa futhi isandla senkampani sitaweluleka to extend lapho khona mhlambe nalabanye sebathola inzuzo kuko konke lesisabe sikwenda kwethu nje ukuthi sisho ukuthi nipha nani yembathane nihambe niye ngaphandle nosebenza.
Frederick Mgomezulu longumphathi wenhlangano lengamele ibhola kuleli uthi babulale amabhodlela kubo baka-NTT ngalolu sito.
Siyethemba ukuthi isandla vele setaweluleka impela njengoba sifisile ukuthi ubudlelwane bethu nabo sishicilele kube budlelwane lokubonakala bubukhulu bubuze. Noma ngabe sengilona lecembe outside balithatha vele balibeke embili lapho bangalibeka khona.
Sithebe samhlekazi besihamba namhla kuyodlala umlente wesibili wemidlalo ekuhlungela indzebe ye-Africa Cup of Nations yabomake. Kanzi Bongani Makhukhula locicisha lona lelikhethelo uthi ucela eMaswati ababaketelele basakha lona lelikhethelo lesive. Kanzi kapteni wakhe Nonhle Simelane uthi batokwenda konke lokusemandleni kutama kunqoba lomdlalo.
Ngaba kuthembisa nje nekucela eMaswatini ukuthi sidinga le support kube kusethe umdustbin ukulahla abantu labangendi kahle uba wasekhanja umuntu basibeketelele will never be perfect but semkhankasweni wekufunza.
Lebo coach sebentile konke lokusemandleni abo nathi sibadlali sesikwendile konke sekusele ngakithi satawuhamba sifisile ukuthi nathi sibuye nema results la positive.
Sithebe sakhala phasi ngalesihlanu ngamagoli amathathu ecanzeni kanzi umlente wesibili udlalelwe enkundleni yaseDobsonville ngalesithathu eNingizimu Afrika. Lobikela umsakazi Eswatini TV temidlalo ngilinda Dlamini Anasimuva Shongwe Kalobamba.
Tingawo-ke tindzabate Siswati sitawubahlola timakethe ngekubuka simo selitulu sitawubuya sichubeke nelihlelo.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.sz. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
Welcome back. Sivusele nolosanza kusivulela malanga lamahle besishito kusisitaba sikhulumisana nemxhumanisi wamaphoyisa nesive kutheke itolo ebusuku amaphoyisa khokha statement secwayisa sive samaswati kakhulu kati labo labashala timoto ukuthi asesime kancane kushayela singene eMozambique ngekuthi kunesimo thide lesichubekako khona lapho kepha kusichazela kabanti sinaye Phindile Vilakade Assistant Superintendent Pico asivusele nomhla ekseni ngabe vele kwentekani khona ngalapho bomhlumeni.
Siyabonga kakhulu Thobeni sivusele kuwe sivusele nako wonke umbukeli esisenge nje sikhokhe statement etelo ntambama semaphoyisa kuxwayisa sive lesisebenzela noma lesihamba siye eMozambique ngesizathu sehlukene sacela ukuthi kwanyalo asesimayile sibukele simo lesichubekako kwentekile ukuthi itolo sathola tincingo lesibuya kuwe eMaswati libe laseMozambique akhala akasakhona ukuhamba kuvinjiwe imigwaco ngesihlahla lesisithi nangemanje sigcineke siba kwalabo lesikhulumisana nabo laba amaphoyisa labakhona eMozambique bathi-ke xa sitawusetshenzwa leso simo Kepha-ke sibonile ukuthi kube netimotolo letifika ngo-15 noma ngetulu kwa-15 leti zinetibanjwa e-hostage ilanga lonke etolo. Lesifaka ama-truck emakhumbi kanye netimoto letincane. Le noma setikhululwa tagcina tihwaywa ngematshe etivalweni. Sigcine tikhululwa sekutawuzabuka kusa ngabo-11 noma past 11 ebusuku. Sikhuluma-ke tikhonile kugcina sibuyile ngala eveni lakangwane. Kungakho-ke amaphoyisa siyacela size sesitame ukuthi sithole kahle izabadephephepha singikayi kulo live labomakhelwane. Lokukhona kokuthi lamalanga akafanani kuyenteka ngalamanye amalanga abantu bahambe nje kahle bagcine babuyile kungenteki lutho. Ngaleyo langa bathi bahamba kube nalezi nkinga letiqhamukako. Kungakho-ke seluleka ngokuthi size asibukisise satawubheka khona eveni labomakhelwane eMozambique kokuthi inzaba yephepha injani. Sesibekele kancane sisibukele isimo semhlambe kungathina sekubonakala ukuthi into sesiyabuya esimeni sebangakhona-ke kuhamba. Kwanya lokho ekuseni sesihlolile kusese mhlambe imoto lesiyibonakalako ingena noma iphuma. Lokusho kona ukuthi kumbe abantu basabuka leso simo. Kungaba kucwayisa-ke nalomnye ukuthi asinikete isikhathi sisidadishe kahle lesimo sengikayi noma sengahambi kuya khona eveni labomakhelwane. Ngingase ngiloko lebese sisekwatisa sive ngabo Thombela.
Ingabe kulabo nje labakhonile kubuya phikho mhlambe nalabo labasolo bavalelekile kudeni imibiko lenitfolile ukuthi balimele ngaso lesimo lesichubekako.
Siyabonga Dr. Kude mhlambe kwanyalo lokubike ngekulimala lokulimele ngito nje imoto lesibonakala vele siuhayiwe ngawo ematshe ngoba lesitfolile ukuthi bebathi nabafika endaweni sike khona eMozambique bakhaza leyo traffic leseyikhona bavele bafakwe la kuleyo traffic bese kuthatha dona tikhiya tetimoto sebahlaliswa lapho-ke kwentekile nje kusukela ekuseni itolo kwaze bawushaya vele lapho i-11. Kepha kude-ke lobike ngekulimala sithemba ukuthi kude vele logcina limala kuleso simo.
Kumbe kokugcina nje phikho ngoba siyathi ukuthi abantu vele mhlambe labanye kutawuba simo lesiphuthumako lokuthi baye eMozambique kumbe batawuthi ikhanza sabachuba inkhani bafuna kungena ngenkhani yebhoda. Ngabe kukhona yini imitamo leyendiwe khona ibhoda mhlambe kuvimba emaswati latawufuna kuwela ngenkhani?
Sasethu ungete wamvimba mhlambe umuntu ngoba phela siyathi ukuthi umuntu wonke unelungelo lakhe. Nekwekuthi-ke mhlambe indlela lesigasa ngayo kumbe security yethu nje personal angeke ifanane. Ukhona umuntu mhlambe lotawuthi nakaseMozambique yena abe ne-personal security yakhe lesezingeni lelifanele. So angeke simphocelele. Kepha lesikwenta ukuthi siyabeluleka sibatshele ngesimo lesikhona kuleso sikhathi. Bese-ke umuntu uyatikhethela yena ukuthi utawuphepha yini siyachubeka kuyahamba. Kepha-ke siyendile nemitamo sikhulume nalabo labafanele noma inhlangothi lesifanele ukuthi kumbe sikulandelele ukuthi size siyaphepha sisefikile khona eveni labomakhelwane. Sithemba ukuthi kutawusita nezinyathelo lezithize titawuthathwa towards lokho noma leso simo.
Yevakala phiko sibonga kakhulu. Kumbe kokugcina nje kumbe umuntu usuyati ikhanza vele sewungenile eMozambique sewusenkingeni kukhona yini la sidakala ngako ushayela bani kumbe yakhona yini ichumane namaphoyisa ngalapha eveni noma khona ngale eMozambique?
Singeluleka ukuthi nakangakhona kushayela la emuva ekhaya sishela abaningi bende njalo itolo bese siyafuna sinengale ukuthi singavuka bobani lesingakhulumisana nabo. Mhlambe kwanyalo singeke sabanisa inombolo ngco sebantu labakhona ngale lesingabathinta ngoba ukhaza ukuthi umuntu ngalesikhathi akekho kuleyo ndzawo loyicabangako. So ngaba ukuthi basithinde nangabe seyikhona inkinga sidawenda leyo mitamo. Sibongile nje kuke kwaba khona simo lapho khona kwasukuma army commander wethu la kangwane wakhulumisana nalabakhona ngale eveni laseMozambique basisita-ke ngaleso sikhathi basisebenzela vele. Asifanani mhlambe letindlela lesingasisebenzisa esimeni letihlukehlukene. So siyacela ukuthi bantu vele lakangakhona nje akamane abambe kuze kwenze lesimo lesikhona atohamba naye akhululekile ngoba nasolinyalelwa imoto yakho ngalinye ilanga siyawugcina kulimala sona sive kuleso simo. Singacela ukuthi sebabambe vele kuze kwenzeke lesimo lesikhona.
Yavakala Smakhulu Phiko Mbukeli nguyelo yomxhumanisi wamaphoyisa nesive Assistant Superintendent Phindile vela kade chaza simo lesichubeka kwa eMozambique. Uyavateke ukuthi kukhona lababuyile ekhaya baphephile kulandzela simo lesikhona. Kuyaveleke ukuthi kube nemaphoyisa kube nesimo lapho khona kukhanzaka letihlahla tisemigwaqweni ngemsimvo lokhona khona lapha eMozambique. Uyacela ukuthi siva sesime kancane kuya kulela live kude simo sibuye esimeni lesikahle. Sasalikhefu sabuya sichubeka nehlelo.
Kude lesinye isikhathi ngaphandle kwalesi
aba research bafunze.
Being risky means ukuthi nalokuwa kwayo kulula.
Nathi kufuna sente ukukhicita ngokusembili.
Asimse sinemukele futhi lesikhathanyelo sitawufuna kubuka umbiko losuka enhlanganweni yetempilo yakamhlaba World Health Organization kuva ukuthi ngabe ngitiphi lathamba mbili kulamalanga kanye nama updates labasiniketa wona ngetindzaba tetempilo. Sasilalela.
Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. As you know, yesterday the WHO Executive Board concluded its first meeting for the year. The Executive Board is the second most important decision-making body in WHO after the World Health Assembly. This year, the board dealt with a large agenda covering the huge range of WHO's work: emergencies, polio, meningitis, cervical cancer, medical devices, air pollution, universal health coverage, and so much more. To support WHO's work around the world, the board recommended that the Health Assembly approves program budget for 2026 and 2027. The board also recommended that the Health Assembly approve the next 20% increase in assessed contributions, the membership fees that countries pay. In 2022, member states agreed to gradually increase assessed contributions from 16% of the base budget to 50%. The increase approved by the board this week is the next step towards that target and is critical for putting WHO on a more sustainable financial footing. Now to the Ebola outbreak in Uganda. So far, the government has reported 9 confirmed cases, including 1 death. More than 260 contacts have been identified and are being monitored. I thank the government of Uganda for its leadership and partnership. WHO is on the ground supporting the government's response. We're providing surge support for surveillance, laboratories, logistics, infection prevention and control in hospitals, treatment centers, and research. National emergency medical teams trained by WHO are providing care for those infected, and we're providing critical supplies from our logistics hubs in Nairobi and Dubai. There are no authorized vaccines or therapeutics against the species of Ebola virus responsible for this outbreak. But thanks to preparedness measures that the government took after the previous outbreak and the global research collaboration led by WHO, we were able to start a trial of a candidate vaccine just 4 days after the outbreak was declared. A therapeutics trial will start as soon as national authorities provide approval. To support the response, I'm releasing $2 million from the WHO Contingency Fund for Emergencies. This is in addition to the $1 million that we contributed earlier to set up the initial response. I thank all donors and partners who are supporting the response. Now to the recent surge in violence in Eastern Democratic Republic of the Congo. which has led to significant loss of life, injuries, displacement, and the destruction of critical health infrastructure. More than 900 deaths have been reported and more than 4,000 injuries. At most, only 1/3 of people who need health services in North and South Kivu are able to receive them. Pregnant women cannot reach health facilities for safe delivery. And the threat of infectious diseases, including mpox and cholera, has multiplied. Hospitals and morgues are overwhelmed. Some health workers have had to flee, while others have been working around the clock for days. WHO remains on the ground, although insecurity is limiting our operations. Anticipating an escalation of violence, we have been working since November to pre-position supplies, including medicines and fuel. However, these supplies are running out and others are running dangerously low or have been looted. We're continuing to respond as best we can. As always, the best medicine is peace. Now to Gaza. Since the ceasefire began in January, WHO has sent 139 trucks with supplies for 1.6 million people. We're expanding our operations and pre-positioning supplies at health facilities. We have supported the evacuation of 414 patients and 588 companions. We have also sent emergency supplies to hospitals in response to the escalating violence in the West Bank. WHO has just published our recovery plan for providing life-saving assistance to the people of Gaza while working on rebuilding and strengthening the health system. We urge all sides to ensure the ceasefire in Gaza holds, hostages are released, and the violence in the West Bank stops. A significant part of WHO's response to health emergencies in Uganda, DRC, Gaza, Sudan, and elsewhere is supported by funding from the United States. As we have said, we regret the announcement that the United States intends to withdraw from WHO, and we would welcome the opportunity to engage in constructive dialogue. There are also actions that the US government is taking that are unrelated to its intended withdrawal from WHO, but which we're concerned are having a serious impact on global health. For example, the suspension of funding to PEPFAR, the President's emergency plan for AIDS relief, caused an immediate stop to HIV treatment, testing, and prevention services in the 50 countries that PEPFAR supports based on bilateral agreements. Although a waiver has been granted for life-saving services, it does not include prevention services for some of the most at-risk groups. Despite the waiver, clinics are shuttered and health workers have been put on leave. WHO is gathering data on service disruptions and supporting countries with mitigation measures, including by filling gaps in supplies of antiretrovirals. The sudden suspension of US funding and the sudden disengagement of US institutions is also affecting the response to global efforts to eradicate polio and the response to mpox epidemics in Africa. In Myanmar, almost 60,000 people, most of them women and children, have been left with no access to life-saving services. And we have limited information about the spread of avian influenza among dairy cattle in the US or human cases. We ask the US to consider continuing its funding at least until solutions can be found. Finally, every year, an estimated 400,000 children worldwide develop cancer. In high-income countries, almost 90% of children survive. In low- and middle-income countries, survival rates are often below 30%. In 2018, WHO established a global initiative on childhood cancer with St. Jude Children's Research Hospital in the United States and more than 100 other partners. As part of the initiative, WHO and St. Jude have also established a global platform to improve access to life-saving medicines for children with cancer in low and middle-income countries. Yesterday, we began distributing childhood cancer medicines at no cost in the first two countries, Mongolia and Uzbekistan. Further shipments of medicines are planned for another 4 countries, Ecuador, Jordan, Nepal, and Zambia. We estimate these treatments will reach about 5,000 children with cancer across at least 30 hospitals in 6 countries this year. 6 more countries have been invited to join the platform, and over the next 5 to 7 years, we aim to reach 120,000 children in 50 countries. We're very encouraged to see how this program has grown since we started in 2018.
I wanted to follow up on the cooperation with the U.S. on the Ebola outbreak in Uganda. Yesterday, Elon Musk said that they have unblocked, or I don't even remember exactly what he said, but basically they had unblocked some financing for the response to the Ebola outbreak. And I was wondering if you can confirm that, if you've seen any of that money or any technical cooperation from the U.S. Happening amid all the fast changes that are happening over here. Thank you.
Thanks. As CDG said, we welcome the dialogue and close collaborations coming from U.S. Both US CDC at the field level, both in Uganda and Tanzania, have been given permission to work very closely with WHO, and we have seen the initial announcement from the US to support the response. So we would like to see more because the demand is huge. Uganda has a very strong capability, have responded. This is the 8th Ebola disease outbreak they're dealing, but it started in the capital, and I think it will be very important for all countries to show that solidarity, not only for Uganda, but all other countries dealing with this response. So we welcome that support, and we expect more.
On Sudan virus in Uganda, are you able to provide an update on the investigation of cases without an epilink? And also, following up on what Dr. Van Kerkhove said, can you clarify how you think that will impact the upcoming influenza consultation? Thank you.
We start with Dr. Mahamat again.
Thanks. Just to reiterate again, all the confirmed cases, the 9, are all epidemiological linked to the index cases. Right now, the ongoing investigation is to understand better how did this healthcare worker got infected. A lot of preliminary investigations are going on, and then the country is improving. So a lot of people get confused between cases, suspect cases, a lot. As the government improves the surveillance system, we expect to see more suspected cases, more alert coming from the community. All those cases have been investigated and confirmed. The government also introduced additional layers of surveillance called mortality surveillance, where they go swab samples from people who died for non-Ebola disease. And so far, out of the 200 deaths, they tested all were negative. So while there's a lot of room for improvement, we are confident Uganda has the core capability and it requires support. So just to reiterate again, all the confirmed cases, epidemiological link to the presumed index case.
So there's a vaccine composition meeting that's taking place in a couple of weeks. Every 6 months or so, the world comes together, the WHO collaborating centers for influenza, technical partners, to make recommendations on seasonal vaccine, influenza vaccine composition. They also make recommendations in looking at the circulating zoonotic influenza viruses to identify candidate vaccine viruses that can be used by manufacturers should there need to be these types of vaccines developed for a pandemic related to a zoonotic influenza. That meeting will take place. There are many meetings that actually lead up to the face-to-face meeting that happens every 6 months or so. US CDC and many partners. We actually have national influenza centers in 130 member states that contribute data to this assessment that happens every 6 months to make the recommendation for the seasonal vaccine composition. So those meetings have been taking place. Data has been exchanged. The face-to-face meeting will take place in a couple of weeks, and the recommendation will come. So I think it's really important that you know that there are several WHO collaborating centers, including some in the United States. They play a major role in the global influenza surveillance and response system. This system has been in operation for 73 years. They are characterizing viruses, influenza viruses that are circulating. They share samples, they share genetic sequencing, they do risk assessments, and they make these recommendations to make sure that the vaccines that are produced by manufacturers provide as much protection as they can against severe disease and death for seasonal flu. But they also make recommendations for viruses that could become a pandemic strain. So we are not in a situation where we're in a pre-pandemic for avian influenza. We're in an inter-pandemic period. So these meetings are really, really critical. That meeting will take place. There will be a recommendation that will be made, and we will make that announcement as soon as that meeting is finished.
And that was WHO's Director General, Dr. Tedros, and his team briefing the media on global health issues. We go for an ad break. We come back with today's traffic update.
When you choose your adventures, you do so with an open heart and a desire for the unexpected. You embark on journeys to discover new worlds full of wonder. You choose a path to awaken your senses, a world to make you look up and realize just how inspiring this life can be. Arrive and awaken your heart. Explore life in ways only thought possible in your dreams. Discover just how far you'll go to expand your understanding of life's greatest mysteries. There's just one place on this planet with so much to offer. Now is the time for you to have the royal experience.
Asimze sinivusele Inspector Sehlo Dlamini sovela sosalayinini kusiniketa simo semgwaqo nyalo ekseni ngikhosa sekuvusele kuhambeka kanjani emigwaqweni yelive nyalo ekseni.
Ngivusele nabo bonke babukele wona umsakazo isibuko semaswati hawu ekseni namuhla imigwaqo yelive iyahambeka kepha ke lokukhona lesikubonile kungaba kulapha elibonjeni nawu lapha edolobheni nematenzelo lidulu liyakhema lapho imigwaqo yakhona imandi kungaba kunxusa nje ukuthi size simane sishayele ngalokukhulu ucophelela sikhanyise nemalambu kwadise phela ukuthi kumbonye nayo phela inkungu ngani-ke nasihamba nalamanye amadolobha kufaka ikhathi lona leli sinalo la eMbabane kuyahambeka kude tikhinyabetho lesibonile tibane temgwaqo tiyasebenza singaba nje-ke ukuthi sincuse ikakhulu nasehla yena phela amalagwane uyakhomba kwekuthi awuvele sowuphinde uqalile kuba nato tikigaba letivamise kwenteka ikakhulu nangabe ukhanze somgwaqo usesemandi timoto-ke nathi siyehla ukhanze sisethisheleliswa ngulabo oyili labaphakamako nangabe ukhanze ukuthi usathanza nje kunyenyeteka lelo vula letinye ke tindzawo kufaka lapha bosipofaneni na uthathana umgubudla losuka khona kuhelehele ulibangise khona eBig Bend tingomo tiyabonakala lapho emgwaqweni kunxusa nje ke ukuthi sive simane silinciphise litubane laso nangabe sisayisebenzisa leyo migwaqo ekhathe edolobheni la kaManzini kuyahambeka ngaphandle kwanathi yatibane lethi lapha eRemand Center ngane na ukhuphukela lapha kubo Living Waters ubheke khona kubosteki kunemsebenzi lapho lochubekako basilungisela wona umgwaqo lapha ke eBig Bend khona nakhona na uthatha naye indzawo lelapha kumahlabaneni uyofika lapha ku junction le Big Bend nakhona imfuyo iyabonakala lapho kuncosa nje ke ukuthi litubane silehlise kanti ke edolobheni la kumathapha khona kuyahambeka tibane tonke temgwaqo tiyasebenza kahle kakhulu ukuthi letingamphazamisa umsebenzisi wemgwaqo nasikhuphukela lapha eshiselweni lapha edolobheni la kaHlathi kumbonye iyona inkungu kani phindze kuba nawo phela umkhimedelo kungaba nxusa nje ukuthi siwakhanyise emalambu ethu lamakhulu lapha ke enhlangano khona umsebenzi solo uyaqhubeka mane uphathanyiswa ngito phela timvula kulungisa naliya libloho la leli lelajubeka lapho solo sisasebenzisa nangiya umgwaqo lobheka ngakhona edolobheni ngani ke tibane letilapha kubheka ngaseposini dona solo atisebenzi ngiyacela nje ke ukuthi simane sibambisane kuze sitokhona ukuthi siphephe sisayisebenzisa ikakhulu imigwaqo yelive kungaba ngiloko lenguphethe elangeni lamuhla ngethembe ukuthi amaswati ayawuthi aphephe.
Kuyavakala sibonga kakhulu Nkosi kusiniketa loyo mbiko lomhla ekseni Inspector Sehlo Dlamini loyo bekasivetela sithombe sesimo semgwaqo nyalo ekseni satha likhefu sibuya netindzaba desingisi.
Kude lesinye isikhathi ngaphandle kwalesi.
Aba research bafunze
Being risky means ukuthi nalokuwa kwayo kumula.
Nathi kufuna sente ukukhicita lokusembili.
The first leg of the Buganu ceremony for the year 2025 has come to an end. The completion of the first leg of the ceremony at Buhleni Rural residents magnified that it was a great success following its commencement last Friday. Members of the regiment that took part in this national event bid farewell to their majesties. The event on the last day started with the arrival of their majesties, where the farewell took place. The nation is also united by culture and values, and so this ceremony plays a very important role on that. The popularity of the event has also attracted other nationalities who have shown their interest by joining the nation and the regiment during the ceremony. On the last day of the ceremony, the regiment started by dancing Ummiso, which was led by the Hoho in Vuna. Their Majesties danced in Njiloni that was led by their Royal Highnesses, the princesses, together with the regiment. The regiment then performed solo dances known as Kutamba. Induna was first to perform this dance. The royal family also took part in this session of the ceremony. Bayeskulu performed exceptionally. Balondolozi Labancane also gave an amazing performance. The rest of the regiment, including the 3 security forces, government ministries, and the regiment coming from the different chiefdoms, also gave out mind-blowing performances. The Maria ceremony is expected to proceed to Hlane Royal residence on the weekend that will be blessed and commissioned by their majesties. On the news, I'm Polile Mazia with Sambulo Masugu at Buhlenu Royal residence.
That was the first leg of the Bukani ceremony. It ended at a very high note at the Buhleni Royal Residence. The ceremony ended when the Lutang Regiment bid farewell to their majesties in song and dance at the Royal Residence. We continue with our news. The Honourable Minister of Education, Owen Ngumalo, says government will be launching a nationwide school maintenance program aimed at improving school infrastructure. The Honourable Minister says this program comes in response to concerns over deteriorating school structures across the country.
The Honourable Minister of Education and Training, Owen Ngumalo, during the debate of the 2025-2026 national budget by the House of Assembly, informed the Honourable House that government is aware of the current state of most of school buildings and classes. Therefore, the ministry is working on a maintenance program for schools.
Maintenance, ngisabuka lokuthi batale ngeke disabambisana i-maintenance lokuya nje finance asesiboneni lokuthi singabe kwenteka sihlelakala siyithatha le mali uphephukile sasangana siphuma sibhekaphi kude iplan esinayo budget.
The Honourable Minister asked for the support of the Ministry of Finance in ensuring full implementation of this program. He says this program will also look into the rehabilitation of schools after natural disasters. The House of Assembly then pleaded with the Minister to look into the offering of permanent posts to temporary teachers who have been on temporary basis for years. The Honourable House also brought to the attention of the Honourable Minister the issue of school principals who still turn back learners who haven't paid their school fees, especially learners under the Orphaned and Vulnerable Children program. Reporting for Eswatini TV News, I'm Samgal Swekoza, Babane.
Rural schools will be provided with 1,000 computers. The Minister of Education, Honourable Owen Ngumalo, says this initiative will be implemented through a collaboration between the Ministry, the Eswatini Literacy Project, and Computers for Africa, a donor organisation from Scotland.
Although this program has not yet been formally implemented through a Memorandum of Understanding, it has already begun at Mhlawiyatvuma School in the Manzini region, which has received 30 computers. The Minister of Education and Training, Honourable Owen Ngumalo, provided detailed explanations about the initiative to donate computers to schools.
Kukhona lama computers esitafundisa ngabo bantwana bo grade 1, grade 2, bese kuthi ke lamasha bese ke angena ku higher primary education bese ke lamanye ke angena nase secondary. Kepha la ifocus yethu itaba kule tikolwa letsemakhaya.
He says some of the computers will be distributed to lower grades, secondary and high schools, with a primary focus on rural schools. He adds that if this partnership continues, books will eventually be accessible through electronic devices, which will have a positive impact on the education sector. Ezekiel Malenya, the director of the Eswatini Literacy Project, spoke on behalf of Computers for Africa. Malenya said that although this program is still in its early stages, it will eventually reach all 4 regions of the country.
We are going to bring more and more computers so that at least each child can have that. And we'll also be bringing books, reading books. These books are not curriculum-based books. These are just books to help cultivate the culture of reading so that the kids can improve in their studies and in their examination. And they'll have also research books. So it's a project that we want, as the minister said, we'll have to sign a memorandum of understanding so that we know that as we expand, we are getting a support from the ministry and with the local government through the municipalities. And this is going to be a big project. We want to start clubs in the schools, which are science clubs. We want to bring in programs like STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics, so that we form them in the primary schools with the help of the scouts.
National Education Strategy for 2022 to 2034 aims to strengthen technology in education. Under this program, the country plans to ensure that 60,000 people gain access to modern education systems. For Eswatini TV News, Fortune Dlangamandla Mbabane.
The Senate has hailed their majesties for the declaration of the Bugano ceremony holiday. Senate says this holiday is testament to the country's commitment to recognize women's rights as declared by the United Nations.
When the Senate convened for parliamentary work on Monday, Senator Prince Ngangabani moved that the Honorable Senate appreciate their majesties for the declaration of a Bugano ceremony holiday.
Sibonga ngavilinye sonke ukuthi bekunene wenda into lenhle kakhulu futhi nje lejabulisako ngoba cishe bomake bekungaba bantu lababonala sibasalele emuva ke nje ke yona kunene ikhombile indlela futhi ke sikudumisa usathi ukuthi singakano singaka nje Madam President siphile ngoba bekunabomake.
It was just an expression of appreciation. Ukuthi sibonga okandaba kusendela umsendo omhlena kangaka. Sibonga okandaba for honoring women. Mhlambe kungaba kunibongela nani bobabe nonke la ngithi maye nibahle. Akushayo tandla endlini koja maye nibahle. Nisuke tandleni tethu. Nonke nisuke tandleni tethu.
Ingwenyama ngekuthi ideclare leli holiday solo iya emphasize kulama protocols livela lisayinile ekuthuthukisa neempowerment yaboma ke nje nehlala kahle yabo.
Kusinika lithuba kosithi once and for all the record has to be set straight ukuthi nasikhuluma ngemaganu festivals asikhulumi nje ngendzaba ukuthi ngilapho siyojabula khona kumbe ngaleto nazo tale sihlahla akwati umhlaba ukuthi lapha siya kwi-event where we are celebrating our customary and traditional identity ukuthi sibobani thine.
The Senate says this declaration by their majesties is a way of recognizing the importance of women's rights as per the United Nations declarations on women's rights and welfare. Reporting for Eswatini TV News, I'm Samgal Swekoza with Zikumbuzo Dlamini and Temba Shabangu, Parliament.
About 50 local small-medium enterprises have been trained on the International Trade Center's market analysis tools. Bonganisi Melane, institutional sustainability expert at the International Trade Center, says these tools will help equip the businesses with tools necessary in expanding exports by analyzing trade indicators, amongst other things.
We are training MSMEs. The target at the moment was 45, but we have already invited more than 50 on this workshop where we'll be training them on the ITC market analysis tools. We have what you call trade map, and we also have what you call market access map. So basically these tools are the tools that actually helps you to gather more information around export data. What exactly are the markets outside there? What exactly are the requirements for me to tap into those markets? And what are some of the prices for those certain products?
Tabani Masugu, business advisor from the Royal Science and Technology Park, shares how the training will assist businesses under their incubation program.
Breaking into the current economy and the current markets that exist in Eswatini can be quite challenging for many reasons. The challenges we experience that our government is currently seeking to address in terms of high data costs, the level of digital literacy. So it's important for these startups to have access to markets that can probably readily adopt and appreciate the products and the services.
Business holders have shared how the training will help them in boosting their external trade.
We're here to learn about how to use market analysis tools to figure out which product and strategize on which products and to export and which countries to export to.
We already do export a lot of our products internationally, but there's never a limit to what we can do. So with this training, we will make sure that we get more markets and we are equipped with the tools that we are being trained on to see which markets will work for us and what kind of products are demanded at which areas and all of those.
The International Trade Center has been conducting a number of trainings to assist local businesses benefit from different trade agreements, including the SADC European Union Trade Agreement, where there has been a low uptake. For Eswatini TV News, Nelswen Dlangamandla, Vuminkosi Nzinisa Mbabane.
The Eswatini Investment Promotion Authority is strengthening its efforts to boost external trade by engaging local financiers to support businesses in the export sector. This has been shared by the Manager External Trade Promotion Tandega Dlamini when detailing initiatives to help local businesses take advantage of the different trade agreements.
What we do at APA, international trade agreements allow preference. It means that if we are, as Eswatini, our government is part, as a country, we are part of that agreement. If our government signs it, we get preference into the markets of all the members that are in those regional blocks or international blocks, so as it were. So what we do at APA, once our government has ensured that we get that preference, whereby maybe our products get lower tariffs, customs duties into those markets. What we do at APA, we help operationalize those agreements because they can exist and nobody takes advantage of them. So at APA, we help businesses take advantage of those opportunities which allow preference for Eswatini products into those markets. I can even give an example to say that the reason why these trade agreements exist is so that they can give us, Eswatini, some competitiveness when we go into these markets, whereby our products can be sold at a lower price in, say, let's say with the ECA, Taiwan Economic, between Eswatini and Taiwan Economic Cooperation Agreement. Our products from Eswatini get preference in that market in terms of customs duties. So we do not attract customs duties. So when we enter there, our products can actually sell at lower prices compared to other countries who actually whose products attract those customs duties. So that's essentially what we do at APA. We help operationalize those preferential markets for export competitiveness.
In international news, as U.S. President Donald Trump reiterated the need to put an end to the war in Ukraine, Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said he'd be willing to step down to achieve peace.
Monday marks the third anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine, and the stakes to bring the conflict to an end are high, U.S. President Donald Trump stressed once more when addressing the Conservative Political Action Conference on Saturday.
But it's got to end. It's a horrible, horrible thing to watch. I'm dealing with President Zelensky. I'm dealing with President Putin.
Trump also referenced a deal in the works that would grant the U.S. rights to access Ukrainian natural resources in return for the military aid America has given to Kyiv to fight the war.
I want them to give us something for all of the money that we put up. So we're asking for rare earth and oil, anything we can get.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky should work with the Trump administration, especially with respect to economic cooperation, said Republican Representative Mike Lawler when interviewed Sunday on ABC's This Week show.
The United States has invested hundreds of billions of dollars to support Ukraine. And when this war is finally over, Ukraine is going to need significant investment to rebuild.
During a forum in Kyiv on Sunday, President Zelensky expressed readiness to continue the dialogue with the U.S. as a partner and hinted he'd be willing to step aside for the sake of peace.
If to achieve peace you really need me to give up my post, I'm ready. I can trade it for NATO if there are such conditions.
Democratic Senator Jack Reed told ABC the U.S. should work closely with both the Russian and the Ukrainian leadership in the peace negotiations, but he anticipates some challenges ahead.
And my sense is that the recriminations by the Russians against Ukrainians after this settlement, if it happens, will be dire indeed, that they will deliberately hunt down and destroy anyone they think was an opponent of them.
Meanwhile, in Russia, President Vladimir Putin participated in ceremonies marking Defender of the Fatherland Day Sunday. He also handed out medals to soldiers fighting in Ukraine and pledged to keep supporting his troops with new and modern weapons and equipment.
Ukraine hosted European leaders on Monday to mark 3 years of all-out war with Russia, while top U.S. officials stayed away in a clear illustration of President Donald Trump's lurch towards Moscow since returning to power.
World leaders joined President Zelensky in putting candles at the War Memorial in Independence Square, Kyiv, commemorating 3 years of war. They then sat down to a crisis meeting on the country's future. As American military support for Ukraine threatens to dry up, there was an air of defiance around the table in Kyiv.
The war in Ukraine remains the most central and consequential crisis for Europe's future. Putin is trying harder than ever to win the war on the ground. His goal remains Ukraine's capitulation, and we know what could happen next, because it has already happened before.
Ursula von der Leyen also announced €3.5 billion of EU money would be sent to the country. Spain separately pledged a further billion, and both Norway and Denmark promised investments in Ukraine's defence and defence industries. Their hope: to frustrate Russia's military campaign and put Ukraine in a strong position for negotiations.
This year must be the year of the beginning of a real and reliable peace. Putin will not give us this peace, nor will he give it away in exchange for something. We must achieve peace through strength, wisdom, and unity.
Ukraine's partners are scrambling to maintain that semblance of unity under threat since Donald Trump's arrival in the White House. He is yet to withdraw military aid, but he publicly called Zelensky a dictator last week, while his Secretary of State Marco Rubio held so-called peace talks with Russia without Ukraine. Trump further undermined Kyiv by declaring publicly that they had no cards to play against Moscow in negotiations. European leaders repeated their calls on Monday for Ukraine to have a seat at the table, while Turkish President Erdogan echoed this and offered to host peace talks.
Immigration and the economy were among U.S. voters' priorities when they went to the polls in November 2024. But how do Americans feel now about the U.S. economy a month into President Donald Trump's presidency?
U.S. inflation rose 3% in January, but several supporters of President Donald Trump in Simi Valley, California, are confident his administration will eventually get it under control.
There's a reason that some prices are up, and
A lot of the prices may never come back, but they won't keep going up once we fix the economy.
I just paid 20 cents more per gallon at Costco yesterday, but it doesn't matter to me because in the future I know my children will be benefiting in some way and our economy will pick up.
Michael Bernanke downplays concerns by several economists that President Donald Trump's plans to impose tariffs on other countries could result in more price increases.
The tariffs, I think, are necessary for leverage, okay? And to make things fair when it comes to us purchasing things from other countries purchasing things from us.
Ong Lee, who owns an auto center in Falls Church, Virginia, voted Democrat in the presidential election. He's already seeing a decrease in customers who are hesitant to spend money on car repairs. If tariffs are imposed on spare parts, he says he'll need to pass some of those extra costs on to his clientele.
I'm not to buy part direct from the Canada or Mexico or China. We have a middleman. When they charge me more money, then we have to increase the price. Otherwise, I cannot run the business.
DC restaurant and lounge owner Douglas Crocker voted Democrat too in the presidential election. He's also making business adjustments in light of rising inflation.
We deal with a number of different wholesale buyers, and we've found ourselves now having to make sure we're budgeting and watching being price conscious about our price purchases.
Konstantin Stavropoulos owns a diner in the U.S. Capitol. Tariffs on ingredients such as Mexican avocados could force him to increase the prices of certain dishes. Although he didn't vote for Trump, he's optimistic some policies the president has proposed will move the economy in the right direction.
My only hope is that he follows through on the tips not being taxed for employees, for tipped employees. That would be a big boom that would help us in the restaurant industry.
He'd also like to see the Trump administration bring the cost of energy down, which Stavropoulos notes impacts truck deliveries of produce.
Ongoing freezes in federal funding are impacting the U.S. agricultural industry. VOA has more from the Midwestern state of Wisconsin.
Farmer Andy Hatch grows and produces what the state of Wisconsin is famous for.
Cows and cheese. It's really what built our state and still is a hugely important part of our economy. $46 billion impact on our state.
A key source of Hatch's income is a specialty cheese that ages on racks in his facility.
It will age for about a year before we sell it. It's in here biding its time, becoming delicious.
To compete with European cheese producers that are heavily subsidized by their governments, Hatch needs to upgrade and expand.
To be competitive, we need support from public institutions, from the government.
Hatch turned to the USDA's Natural Resources Conservation Service, or NRCS, for funding.
We applied for and were awarded federal funding through the NRCS. And that funding was meant to cover about 25% of a project that will stretch over $1 million.
Hatch had already spent about $50,000 on designs for modern, environmentally friendly facilities for housing and feeding cows that produce milk for cheese, when he received notice in January that funding for USDA conservation projects was frozen.
We've not started construction, and we won't until we're sure that the funding we were promised is going to come through.
We're not getting paid or reimbursed for work that we have done.
Joe Tamandel is executive director of the Dairy Grazing Alliance, which also depends on USDA funding for a variety of projects, including apprenticeship programs intended to train a new generation of dairy farmers and agricultural workers.
We understand, the objectives of the administration and coming in and making sure that there isn't any abuse of the systems. And we just hope that we're not an unintended consequence of it, because we really align with what this administration is looking at doing.
Uncertainty is the biggest risk for all actors in the agricultural supply chain.
Andrew Stevens is an assistant professor of agriculture and applied econometrics at the University of Wisconsin. He says even if funds begin to flow again, farmers will be wary about future reimbursements.
The uncertainty of these federal freezes is really going to shift how farmers are making decisions and calls into question things that used to be taken for granted.
In her first comments to reporters after being confirmed as the Trump administration's U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, Brooke Rollins said one of her top priorities was addressing federal funding freezes.
If there are farmers that are indeed waiting for payments that have been committed to them, those will come through.
We will pause. We will wait.
Farmer Andy Hatch hopes the federal funding he was promised arrives soon.
But if it doesn't, we won't be able to build.
Despite the funding delays, the USDA projects overall net U.S. farm income in 2025 will increase about 30% over 2024.
In our sports news, the president of the Handball Association in Eswatini, Kusile Manyati, says league matches provide a good picture of the players and help identify top talents who can be selected for the national team. This team will compete in the Regional Africa Zone Games in Zimbabwe.
Zimbabwe is set to host the Southern Africa Handball Championships 2025 games, and Eswatini is also expected to be part of the tournament. To prepare for the competition, the National Handball Federation is currently hosting league games where players under the age of 15 and 17 will be selected for the national team.
Competitive is very good. Yeah, the competition is very high. Kakhulu because kunemali ledlalelwako. So uyabona ukuthi wonke mvufaka emandla. Position 1 uthola 1000, position 2 uthola 700, position 3 uthola 500. Then every team they participate uthola 200. Kuletikola because most of the teams letile sitithwala tikolweni. Even though Kansas letinye ama teams kupigcene tikola letitsite but nje tiyajabulisa kakhulu because out of the 8 schools kukhonile ukuthi kufike 6.
The federation has successfully secured a foreign coach from Zimbabwe, Kevin Timkulu, who will select and coach the national team for the tournament.
Paying more attention to players establishing which positions they play pertaining the game, and for them to get used to the rules and being enforced while they are playing in international level. Stage fright, we're trying to run away from that so that they need to get used to having a whistle blown whenever they do wrong, so that they get used to it, not to get there and be limbered by stage fright again.
The tournament in Zimbabwe will take place from April 28 to May 4, 2025. Reporting for Eswatini TV Sports, I'm Linda Dlamini, Mbabane.
And that marks the end of our second bulletin. Thank you for staying with us. We go for an ad break. Let's leave you with the weather for now.
Eswatini TV has signed a code of conduct that is enforced by the Eswatini Communications Commission. We are committed to reporting news that is accurate, comment that is fair, and programming that does not amount to hate speech or the description of gratuitous violence or explicit sex. For any complaints of our programming, please contact us on 2411-9600 or email info@eswatinitv.co.sz. You can also contact the Eswatini Communications Commission on 2406-7000 or write a letter to ECCOM on PO Box 7811 Mbabane. Email address is info@ecom.org.sz.
Thank you for staying with us and welcome back to the program. You're still watching Kusile Breakfast Show. This is the Tuesday edition. We are still expecting to speak to Nozipho Masangane from the Ministry of Health regarding some of the issues around teenage pregnancy. We saw a harrowing story yesterday. But before we chime into that, as we wait her to come into our studios, we do want to continue to look at the World Health Organization media briefing on global health issues.
I'd like to ask Dr. Tedros if you could just be specific. In your preliminary remarks, you mentioned that 60,000 people, more than 60,000 people in Myanmar have no access to life-saving services. And you mentioned that the effects of polio and mpox because of the U.S. funding cuts. Could you just be more specific, if possible, about the real impact, the real-world impacts of the U.S. Funding cuts? And if I could just ask Dr. Van Kerkhove, you mentioned that the U.S. stopped reporting influenza data through the WHO global system. Could you be specific about when that was, please? And sorry, I'd just like to slide in one last one. You mentioned that there's not been information sharing from the United States. How much does that remind you of when the United States was asking China to share more information during the COVID pandemic? Thanks.
I mean, the communication from CDC stopped around the 24th of January. But up until that, I want to be really clear, you know, there are incredible scientists at US CDC and across US institutions, as well as the institutions in all of the member states that we work with. We hope that this exchange resumes soon. We are continuing to reach out to our colleagues in the U.S. government agencies. We haven't heard back from them, but we will continue to reach out, and we hope, again, that exchange resumes. I want to reiterate that the U.S. has reported human cases of avian influenza through IHR. That has continued. And we do hope that there will be more uploads to the different websites and through the different portals related to influenza, as well as other diseases. So it's not just influenza, obviously, that we're concerned about, but all of them. And this ask is for all of our member states, you know, to continue to do good detection work, to utilize their surveillance systems, multiple components of surveillance systems, because everything that we do in support of our member states in pandemic prevention, preparedness, readiness, response is around surveillance, detection, collaboration, and supporting those capacities that exist in all countries so that we can prevent that next big event from happening.
Thank you very much. And now let me look around if we have Dr. Zakaria maybe for the partner. Dr. Zakaria, to remind everyone, is the unit head for humanitarian and disaster action. Please go ahead, Teresa.
Thank you. So I will attempt to answer the question on Myanmar, but I think it's mostly generally about the needs in Myanmar. And touch a little bit just on the contribution from the United States of America for WHO's work in humanitarian emergencies. What's very important to highlight in Myanmar is the very large portion of the population that has no access to health services. In 2025, close to 20 million people are expected to be in need of some kind of humanitarian assistance, and that includes health services. The focus of WHO's work has really been to increase access to health services in those areas that have been hardest to reach. We still have a long way to go to properly increase coverage to health services, for which donations, funding that is provided by the United States is significant. So the number quoted is a reflection, basically, of the number of people that we are trying to improve their access to health services. But it's really just a small portion of the entire number of people actually in need of humanitarian assistance in Myanmar. And we do very frequently forget just the scale of suffering and needs in this country as well. Just very quickly to touch on the United States of America's contribution to WHO's emergency operations, we're looking at 39% of the total funding received and available for WHO's emergency operations for the grade 3 emergencies. So that's quite a significant amount, and what it means is that everywhere in any graded emergencies, in any settings, territories, and countries where WHO is trying to respond to these emergencies, it's about increasing access to health services. It's making sure that people have access, they do not face barriers in accessing the services that they need, and that the public health functions are operational. So quantifying those who are directly impacted is a way of showing it.
Okay, that was a brief media briefing by the World Health Organization on global health issues. Let's go for a break.
There is a disease so contagious that if a child infected with it walks into a classroom, every child that is not vaccinated will most certainly get infected. We are talking about measles today with our expert, Dr. Natasha Crowcroft. Welcome, Natasha. Talk to us about why parents need to be concerned about measles.
Measles is not just a rash. It's a very serious infection that can put your child in the hospital. 110,000 children died from measles last year. It can cause blindness, it can cause deafness, it causes pneumonia, and in worst case, it causes death. And also a brain infection that occurs later on, years later, after a child has apparently recovered from measles. So all of these complications of measles, they're devastating, but they're all completely preventable through vaccination.
Why are measles cases increasing all around the world?
So measles is on the rise because not enough children have been vaccinated. There was a big fall in the number of children being vaccinated during the COVID-19 pandemic. And so there's a big gap in our immunity. About 22 million children missed out completely on their measles vaccine in 2023, and that's led to big outbreaks of measles all around the world, with a big increase in the number of cases.
What about the measles vaccine? Is it safe? Is it effective?
It's safe, it's effective. In fact, it's so effective that the measles vaccine has saved more lives than any other vaccine we have in our routine program today. We estimate about 60 million, or in fact more than 60 million children's lives were saved by measles vaccine in the years since the year 2000. So imagine that, there are 60 million children who are alive and healthy because of vaccination, which is a miracle.
Now, the measles vaccine has to be administered at a certain age, and there's a second dose. Talk to us about it.
The first dose is routinely given at 9 months of age in countries where there's quite a lot of measles around to get protection early. But in countries where there's less measles, we leave it a bit later, till 12 months or older. And then the second dose is given at least 3 months afterwards. It can be a few years later, depending on the country's schedule. So 2 doses is really needed, but with 2 doses, you get close to 100% effectiveness against measles, which is fantastic.
So this is one of the most infectious diseases, and we have an effective vaccine that has saved millions of lives. If you were to speak to parents, what would be the one thing you would want them to know about measles and how to protect their children?
As a parent myself, I know that the most important thing as a parent is to make sure your child is safe and healthy and grows up to be healthy. Measles vaccine is incredible because it's so effective at preventing measles, and measles has such devastating impact that the impact of the vaccine, which has saved 60 million lives since 2000, it actually makes children healthier, so they do better at school. It makes economies flourish. It's a fantastic way to protect your child for communities. So I would just say the one thing you need to know as a parent is that vaccination It's safe and effective, and it's the best way to protect your child.
Thank you, Natasha. So that was Science in 5 today. Until next time, then stay safe, stay healthy, and stick with science.
Hey there, this is Joyce, an economist at the IMF, and this time we are talking about the IMF. Today, I want to address a question I've been getting from many people, including my own family and friends. What exactly is the role of the IMF, and why does it matter? First of all, no connection to the Mission Impossible movies. We are not the fictional spy agency known as the Impossible Mission Force, although we are happy to share in the IMF name. Also, we're a little bit older than Tom Cruise. In fact, the IMF was founded in 1944, when World War II was still raging. Countries were keenly aware of the need for international cooperation, including an international organization to promote economic and financial stability. Think of the IMF as one big credit union, where our member countries deposit their resources and from where they can also borrow. So, what does the IMF do? Our work is actually focused on 3 key areas. We conduct economic research and offer policy advice. We provide financial support, and we help countries build their institutional capacity. Let's start with policy advice. At our headquarters in DC, our teams gather, produce, and share data to analyze the economies of our 191 member countries. We also advise governments and exchange information with them on a continuous basis. Then, at least once a year or two, we also have the pleasure of going to most of the countries we work on. Now, you may think we only meet the central bank and the Ministry of Finance. In fact, we meet with stakeholders as varied as NGOs, academics, private sector firms, climate action entities, fintech firms, and anti-corruption offices. All of these meetings give us a well-rounded bird's-eye view of each economy. Being in the field also allows us to get a sense of each country's culture, customs, and when we're lucky, the wonderful foods. We then put together the analysis of each of the countries and produce the regional and global economic outlook reports. Our holistic view of so many countries allows us to compare policies and take into account how each country's choices impact others. Let's move on to lending. The IMF is a so-called lender of last resort, meaning that we stand ready to lend to countries and to take on countries' risks, even when markets are not willing to, or especially when markets are not willing to. Is this risky? Yes, but we do this for many reasons. Most importantly, because economic crises carry high costs for people. They can cause unemployment and loss of purchasing power and savings. When the IMF lends, we also support economic reforms in the recipient countries. These are designed by its government with IMF assistance to ensure that the country exits in a stronger economic position. Let me end on capacity development. If IMF lending reminds people of, at times, emergency room doctors, our capacity development is a physical therapist who helps countries strengthen their institutions and policymaking. Over 160 countries receive direct assistance from the fund to advise and build capacity for their institutions. We also provide extensive training for public officials. The technical assistance work, like all of IMF's work, is usually hands-on, pragmatic, and designed with each country's circumstances in mind. The areas of focus range from public financial management to social spending and frontier topics like digital currencies. And that's it for today. Be sure to continue sending us your questions to askAneconomist@imf.org, and see you next time.
We are here in the Emergencies Operations Center of WHO's headquarters in Geneva. This is where WHO receives over 100,000 signals every month. Any of these signals could be a real health threat, an outbreak, or even a pandemic. So how do scientists and WHO together decide which one of these signals could be a potential outbreak? We are here with Dr. Chikwe Ihikwazu today to discuss just that. Welcome, Dr. Chikwe. Why are there so many threats, health threats, that we receive signals for?
So all around the world, something is happening. Sometimes it's obvious to us. There's flood somewhere, there's a heat wave, there's conflict, and there are always health consequences. But sometimes there are these little bugs, there are viruses or bacteria that cause a new disease outbreak. You know, a cluster of people ill or dying from one thing or the other. So everywhere around the world, it is nature. And some of it is obvious to us and some are not. And our work is to have systems where we can find these and make sure that we as a joint humanity has a way of responding to these threats wherever they're happening.
So these signals, what do they look like? Where are they coming from?
What we call signals are really anything unusual. Sometimes there are more people in your local hospital. Sometimes we find people having diseases for which we don't expect young people to have, or different demography in any society to have. And sometimes it's just we hear more people are dying in parts of the world. Or sometimes it's very obvious. You know, there's a flood, there's war, there's conflict, and people are dying. So this is really what we respond to. And our role is to understand what is usual and what is unusual and respond to that is not normal, and make sure that with our partners in countries, with our colleagues working at the different levels all over the world, that we have a way of identifying what is happening, defining what is usual, what is unusual, and then devoting our resources to responding to the unusual.
What's the process of sifting that we go through?
So we have a system which really works in every country, through which a lot of this work is done. Some of it is automated. It scans through all the media sources, newspapers, radio, social media, and sometimes just phone calls from doctors working in some clinic around the world. So a lot of the early part of this work is automated. Then we use artificial intelligence to sieve out the noise, and ultimately we have to go through a process we call verification, which very often means that someone is picking up a phone, calling the colleague somewhere in the community saying, listen, we heard this, what is going on? Sometimes we arrange for a sample to be taken from a group of people and sent to a lab to confirm what disease is happening. So it's a process called verification, and the point is really to sieve out what requires an organized response and what a local hospital can manage on its own.
What is the role that the countries play in this entire process?
At the heart of this work is that no country, no community, no hospital can do it on its own, because we need to work together. Things can only be more than expected if you know what to expect. And what to expect is really an average of what happens globally. So for this work to work, we have to collaborate between countries, collaborate between the human, the animal sector, colleagues working in the environment. If these three parts of our response are not working together, we don't get it right. So it requires a lot of collaboration around the different professions across different countries, continents, and also across people working in these different sectors.
As an individual, what can we do?
So what every individual can play is, in addition to all the roles we have, we should also all think of ourselves as health detectives. So when you see something unusual happening in your community, whether it's children getting ill, whether it's more people dying, or whether you just see that the weather has changed so much and people are just not the same, you can make sure your local health authority is informed, or maybe just your local doctor. Just make sure that if your sense is that something unusual happened with the population, a group of people that you work with, you might be a teacher, you might be a doctor, you might just be a leader in a community, make sure someone knows about it, that they can then inform the local health authority, and they'll ultimately pass that information to the World Health Organization.
Thank you, Dr. Chikwe. Here's to you, our audience, being the next disease detective and reporting anything unusual that might be going on in your part of the world. Until next time, then, stay safe, stay healthy, and stick with science.
Yeah, all right. Welcome back. It's 7 minutes before 8 o'clock. Besbuganje Science in 5 with a WHO. We were hoping we would have an interview with Zandile Masangane from the Ministry of Health, sikhuluma unwanted pregnancies or teenage pregnancies. Yesterday we saw a headline in one of the newspapers that a 20-year-old girl strangulated her baby rather, and another one umgcumsele ku-pit latrine lekuyinfo lekumele ukuthi siyikhulumise lesolo ikhona lesolo ichubeka yendeka unwanted pregnancies or teenage pregnancies. So layachubeka lapha even Eswatini bisifuna ukuva ukuthi ngabe imaphi ama-programs laba wendako kuzama to educate young people, especially teenagers, ukuthi bangativikela kanjani ukuthi bangatikhansi bamitha unwanted pregnancies.
Yeah, Lulu, I think it's easy for umuntu ukuthi react kule headline lena abukela ukuthi okay, umfana lo, a newborn baby has been strangulated and killed, and it's easy for us to react lapho sishaqeke, but the story is much bigger than a newborn baby being strangulated. It's much more concerning masibuka nje lokho ukuthi isuka le ndzaba. I mean, a 20-year-old umuntu otalwe 2005 loyo, it should be a matter of concern. We are young ourselves. Me and you are young ourselves, but you know, we try to look back, and we're not saying these issues are now unique as kakbon logo from some of our peers, but it looks like it has exacerbated. And what is even more concerning ukuthi ke lethi nombolo dinywa ngaleli zinga kube kunemithetho leminingi leseyiqinisiwe kufundziswe kanengi. There's been a lot of, you know, awareness conversations. Even us as media, we do our bit in you know, spreading and commentating on such issues. So the problem is much deeper than the headline, which raises a concern. My personal question is, are we still doing enough as families, as schools? Because I do remember my biggest memory, Jamine, my earliest memories, you know, Timfunzi Sota primary, Timfunzi Sota high school, which made me, you know, question a lot of things around participating in invented nabo sex. This is a 20-year-old who was born in 2005. They have been pregnant.
Yeah. You know, I was reading a few comments Fiso on social media, lokuthi, you know, ungamkhulisa kahle umfana as a parent, umfundzise inhlonipho, umfundzise ukuthi iphatha kahle, but still ahamba ayokuhlaza lebanvini. So we do have parents laba zamako ukuthi bantfu babo babafundzise tindzaba telicantsi, babafundzise inhlonipho, but still they would go out of their way to embarrass their parents. So in such cases, it's not the parents to be blamed, but the child. So
I can agree with that to a certain extent, because another thing, utamfundzisa lo mfana, but ngabo 6 khwale lihlelo lolibukela naye lapha ku TV lelicala livete letinvo leti provoke these you know, sensations and desires. 6:30 is another program that does the same thing. At 8, that very famous program that we all know, that we grew up watching, which also does the same thing. So some of these other things we also, I think that's still part of parenting from my end. Could say lo mfana exposed to what? Yabonyalo sabana tingcingo babukani la tingcingo at least sikhule. You know, there's a famous saying now, let's see, people should learn to go and touch grass. These kids should touch grass. Sine vele sikhule etshanini, sikhule emhlabathini, siphusha amaplango, sidlala ngephandle. Our thoughts were so far from thinking about tinvo tebantu abadala. Sebatibona ke la kubo talk nabo social media, face, Twitter, those things.
Yindzaba lenkulu esifiseni, because imfomatana nje ikhanda say drop her out, but umfana yena ka drop out. Lelo mithise lo mfana, it's a big issue lokuthi vele ngabe ingendiwa kanjani. So it's one of the things that has to be addressed by the Minister of Health and Minister of Education ukuthi vele siyapi sibenda kanjani labantwana. How do we protect our kids?
It's a conversation lesitawuqhubeka sibe nawo bonkosi siyethemba la ukuthi belitiko letempilo ekuxoliseni kwabo khona lokuzivelele lomhla ekseni sitawusitfola sisombululo sokuthi emalanga asaqhubeka sibatfole bete lapha ehlelweni batawusipha ama-insights abo njengabantu ke labadisebentako letindzaba from an expertise level kwethu nje kuthakuta lapha nalapha kufaka ama-opinions ethu but siyafuna lokuthi vele sibabutele imibuto lesicabanga ukuthi kwananawe lapho ekhaya unayo uyafuna kuba netimphendvulo kuyo.
Yeah. Malakalogo, thank you for joining us, Lomhla Ekseni. It's 2 minutes before 8 o'clock. We've come to the end of our program today. Thank you for tuning in. We'll see you again at exactly 6 a.m. tomorrow. Have a beautiful day.